Oh, well, okay. Well, good morning, Pete, and good morning, Elizabeth. Thank you so far. It's been fantastic, and I'm sure we've got another fantastic session coming up. For people who don't know me, I've been always interested in care, experienced people, or post-care adults, how I used to call it, and also adopted people and people who don't conceive. And I believe that people have rights to information and records, and I think it's fantastic that the research is bringing us all together, really, to sort of try and do something more about it. But anyway, it's not about me and my information, but I'm just really pleased to actually introduce our very first speaker this afternoon. This morning, sorry, it's Gavin Moorghen, who works with the British Association for Social Work, and who will talk about how care experienced people informed our approach to better recording. Got 10 minutes. Okay, Gavin.
Thank you, Julia. Yes, I'm, hello everybody. It's great to be here. So my name's Gavin. I'm a social worker and I work for the association, and I have done for some time now. I've worked in a mixture of adults and children's social work. I'm also a parent. Me and my partner Alex, we have a little girl who's 6. I'm mentioning that deliberately. But what I dug out that I just had this sort of just lying around. I want to show you something. It's this. So my first job was in, oh, hello, Vasily. Me and Vasily know each other from previous role at Kafkas. So my first job was in a maternity social work team in a hospital. And one of the things we were given, as well as this, was a broken computer, sometimes slightly crowded a room. And but I've got to say, I really loved that job. It was brilliant. I love the people I worked with. I love the people I sat next to in the office. And at times it was difficult. But yes, this, for those of you who aren't quite sure what it is a dictaphone tape. And it was one of the very last places I ever worked where I was allowed to type, to speak into a dictaphone for my case notes, or for the case notes of the people I was recording for, and then give it to somebody to type up, and then it would go into the case file. And I can't tell you how many stories have been recorded on this, then deleted. And I'll say it's wiped now, but even if it wasn't, and it is, I wouldn't be able to listen to it anyway because I don't have a dictaphone to play it on. It's old technology. We don't use things like this anymore. I knew when I was recording onto those tapes and that they were put in it and they were typed up, that case notes were important. Case recording was important. I don't think I always knew why. And that takes us to this next bit, really. And I'll just tell you that we have actually produced some top tips for better recording in social work. And it comes from our 80/20 campaign, which is about reducing the amount of time social workers have to do admin tasks and increasing the amount of time for reflective practice, direct work with the people that we work with, and things like case notes, which should not be process driven, but be about the story for the people we work for. And when we set about doing this top tips document, which I'm going to share with you in the chat box now. There, you should all have it now. So you're there, it's yours, and please share it with everybody you know. We spoke to people who had received social work services, people who we work in partnership with on our 80/20 group. People includes our patron at Baswa, who is somebody who's now a social worker, but who's also gone through the care system. He's care experienced himself. Somebody who's going to be speaking at this conference tomorrow has also been part of the kind of the review group for this. And so it's very much driven by the voices of people who've received services as well as social workers themselves. And what they said about case recording, and I'm sure some of you will be aware of this, is they've said that their story isn't always reflected and that case notes should be reflecting their story. Their voices should be reflected and captured. It should be accessible, not just physically, but also in terms of the language that's used. The decisions should be in there. And something that I'll come back to in a moment is about this being a doorway or portal into childhood, because for some people, case notes is their sole way of accessing something about their history. And I think about some of the people who, some of you might be familiar with the term foundling. It's what we used to call children who'd been found where we didn't know who their parents were. And I've worked with more than one person who was that. I mean, we don't really use that language anymore, but I remember seeing it in case recording. And actually I recognized that not only was that hurtful, but actually their case records were even more important to those people. It was important that it told their story. So the top tips, which you'll see in this, include it's all about how we include the child, and we've also talked about how it's important to. So you could even do it as if you're writing a letter to the child or family that you're working with, it's about having purpose and analysis, and this concept of if it's not written down, it didn't happen. We're moving away from that, and I'll tell you now that Ofsted have certainly supported that view, and I've got it on record in a podcast if anyone's interested, which you can access through the BASWA website, where it's more about the quality of recording and the purpose, not about recording everything that happens. And Elizabeth saying that language is so important. Absolutely. We've also talked about having perhaps memory objects in there, and thanks to MIRRA for supporting us with working in partnership with us on this. There's also something about why decisions are made, and I think and the different views that you get from different professionals. And sometimes I think it's more helpful for people to know that we perhaps made a mistake at times, than for us to try and pretend a mistake didn't happen. And at least then they understand the process and they understand why decisions were made. We put a point about access here. So there's the physical access, and again, you'll be hearing from someone tomorrow who'll be talking about how she wasn't allowed to access her case notes in the first instance. Then when she did, it was heavily redacted. And then when she was able to get the unredacted versions, the language didn't always make sense and it was quite cold. And it needs to be balanced. Now, you can look at the details, go to this in more details through the link. And as I said, please do share this document, with as many people as you can. But I would say that case notes, the learning that I took from this, and this was heavily influenced, as I said, by the people with lived experience. But the message I got was that the case notes, it's like a clock. It's a portal and it's a clock, and it can take you to different points of your life. I mentioned I'm a dad. This is my 6-year-old daughter, Lara, a few years ago. I can tell you she was sitting in a bouncy chair that vibrated and played music. And me and my partner made a decision to get that. I can tell you she's holding Special Bunny, a present from my dad to Lara, which has now remained her special toy, even now she's 6. This is my partner, Alex, with Lara. Lara being the most important thing to Alex, as always, and Lara looking happy with whatever she's doing. Here's another one. Lara wearing an outfit my mum sent her, typical Mauritian outfit. There's the Mauritian flag behind her. There's a Bavarian flag, which is important to Alex because she lived there for a while and she can speak German fluently. Here's the first day of school. I can tell you also, there's a COVID reference here, the rainbow. I can tell you why we chose those tiles. I won't do it now. I can tell you why we chose yellow for the wall. Why am I telling you this? Because it's a clock, it's a portal. It takes us to different parts of our lives. It takes us to places that we might have, called home. It tells us about the people that we loved, the people that we had bonds with. It tells us where we're from and where we're going. We take this for granted. I take this for granted. And hopefully Lara's going to take this for granted. But the case notes are so important here because for some people, this is their clock, this is their portal. And so this guidance is about who we are, and it's about who they are as well. And so it's really important we maintain high standards on this.
Okay, thank you, Gavin. That's really very helpful, actually, very important. So we're going to move on, because I know time is short, to Rebecca Watts, who works for Brighton Council, and her presentation is entitled Me and My World, Writing with the Child on Your Shoulder. So over to you, Rebecca.
Thank you so much, Julia. I'm just going to share my screen just for a second. I'm hoping there's not going to be any glitches, and I hope that works. Can everybody see that? Is that working? Yes-ish. Let me just... Okay, so today I'm really here as a social work practitioner, my role is a lead practitioner within Brighton and Hove City Council, and part of my role is to support practice with children in care. And really, we, within Brighton and Hove, in 2016, we attempted to introduce a new model of relationships recording and review for children in care. I mean, it's that I'm going to talk to you a little bit about today. And in many ways, it was introduced to try and address some of the real challenges and the real themes that were emerging in relation to care experienced people coming back and accessing their files. And we asked ourselves some questions about how can we make this different and more fit for purpose. And I think it's just really important to acknowledge as well that a lot of what care experienced adults say about their experiences are shared by social workers too. And I think that actually a lot of social workers have really spoken from their lived experience as well about how the ICS system in which they're often operating really kind of at times feels like it sits at odds with their value base and how they want to be with children and try and kind of record their lives. In many ways, I think social workers have to try and manage this kind of their roles and the narratives of the children that they work with. They're often just reduced to this single story tick box, which really kind of focuses just on universal outcomes and key performance indicators, with little opportunity for them to kind of give voice to their relationships and the many multiple perspectives and individuality of children's experiences and lives. So you'll see here the social worker sitting at their their desk with kind of an exploding kind of computer. So really, kind of the intention of Me and My World was to just try and kind of create a system really which addressed the shortcomings in recording practice in a way that ensured that they were really an integral part of the day-to-day social work role and statutory processes. I was really aware from the beginning, really, and I'm a great pragmatist, really, about just and without kind of losing some of the idealism behind it, but really we had to really work within the realities of practice with trying to create some tools and resources which were really simple and immediately to hand for social workers. We really wanted to kind of challenge the current recording orthodoxy of key performance indicators as this given, and try to attempt to create a more fit for purpose recording system, which would kind of promote core social work values of child-centred and relationship-based practice. So what did we do? Well, there's three kind of main components of Me and My World, and they're kind of mutually dependent and influence one another. I mean, the starting point for it was really, the model was introduced at a time of reorganisation within Brighton and Hove, and we had a model of practice which really emphasised continuity of relationship between social worker and the child. And so children that are referred to Brighton and Hove, the intention is they have the same social worker through their kind of journey, from kind of initial kind of duty context through to whether if they might kind of need to kind of come into foster care. We also emphasise within those relationships direct work to help children and young people kind of try to understand their experience, support explanations, and to capture their voice. We were also aware that we were working within a kind of a statutory kind of review process, which we also kind of needed to work within. But we shifted the emphasis of those reviews and really tried to kind of focus on participation of the child or young person, control within the review context to promote self-efficacy and decision-making. And the intention is that practitioners promote choice about where reviews should take place, activities to support the discussion, and a real kind of focus on celebrating achievement and success. And then one of the other main components really was an overhaul of the recording system, and that's what I'm mainly going to talk to you about this morning. And we changed the forms on our ICS system to ensure that every record in relation to children in care is actually written to the child. And the idea, again, in terms of some key principles, was they were kind of co-produced. The questions that are now asked of social workers and the children are very much related to relationships, identity and life story, rather than kind of the key performance indicators which sit separately on the system. And this is also supported by a letter which foster carers write to the child, where they're encouraged to kind of include magic moments in family life and their key experiences. In order to evaluate what the impact of this had been, we undertook a small-scale kind of research study, and part of my time I'm based at the University of Sussex, and so I was supported in this by a colleague, Gillian Roosh, at the university. And we kind of we had some small focus groups with social workers, independent reviewing officers, and also undertook some semi-structured interviews with the children and young people. And actually, just in terms of just giving you an overview really about what we found, overall, some of the key messages were that the process of writing to the child really promoted a shift in perspective in feelings about the recording and what is recorded in the professionals. Unusually for social workers and IROs, they actually quite liked the process of writing the reports, which is, often kind of social workers complain about how much time they spend recording. Actually, they really saw the value in this. They identified that it really tied them to the child's experience, encouraged them to empathise with their perspective, and really kind of linked with that overarching sense of this is going to be read by the child, and enabled them to kind of just really hold that in mind as they were writing. We found that they felt that the narrative approach encouraged more flexibility in what was written and allowed for some wondering in what might be going on for the child. It also allowed for a greater focus on strengths and achievements, and there are some wonderful examples of recording of events in children's lives, including music festivals, drama clubs, and key family celebrations. From the focus groups of the foster carers, we also found that there's real evidence of the letters being an integral part of foster families' lives, with children reading the letters on an ongoing basis, and really creative approaches to storing the letters alongside memory boxes. The process of writing to the child also supported explanations regarding life story by helping rehearse explanations in the minds of foster carers and professionals, and then the report sharing supporting the gathering of the child's own story in respect to this. And so I just wanted to share just a couple of quotes from the research study. And the first one is from an independent reviewing officer who said that when I started as an IRO, I often used to question about who I'm writing to when I'm writing records. So I think that the Me and My World approach has answered that question very clearly for me. It makes us think about how they might have this shared with them, and sort of powerfully ties us down to the child's experience. And then the second quote is, we've got SATs this week, and this is her self-soothing way. When she can't calm down to get to sleep, she gets her memory box out, and in it she's got her letters, and she will go over them. And she will come into the bedroom to me and say, oh, I did that. No, did I do that? And I'm really seeing the benefit of them. And I think for us, it helps. It makes us think, oh, do you know, we have achieved something. One of the other key themes was very much around the process of writing to the child. And there was a real emphasis on the need to take real time in writing these reports. One social worker recalled that sort of the need to kind of go slowly on the keyboard, and another made reference to the need to draft and redraft. Imagining the child on my shoulder was a strategy for another social worker. One social worker sought a different physical space to begin the process of writing, with the office and kind of formalised processes associated with it, sort of judged to restrict the capacity of the worker to meaningfully connect with the child. And so again, this is just another couple of quotes that where they said,
you're nearly running out of time.
Okay, that's absolutely fine. I won't I won't share these. I've just got 2 more slides, Julia, if that's okay, but I'll make sure the slides are shared with everybody. Okay. I also just wanted to say, actually, that with regards to children's voice, there are some clear examples of how the reports and letters provide a starting point for a conversation, and children and young people being able to express their views and opinions. There are examples of children and young people writing letters back and giving voice to their experience. A 6-year-old girl, when asked how she felt on reading her letters, she said comfort. And the examples on the slides encapsulate how the approach can lead to the start of the conversation. And again, I'll just share one of these quotes where a social worker said, I'll meet with him and read through it and just kind of read it out loud to him. And I ask that he chimes in with anything that he wants to. And then the second quote here is actually a quote from a letter that a child in care wrote back to their foster carer. He's kind of given consent for this to be shared. But what he said was, he was 16 when he wrote this, and he said that you're probably wondering what I am doing writing you a letter, as it contradicts my opinion. But I thought instead of just saying thank you, I would take some time out of my busy working day and return the favour with something that you would appreciate more. And within the letter, he kind of reflects on his journey with that with those foster carers and what living with them has meant to him. I think it's just really important to acknowledge, just finally, this is just my last slide, is that actually asking ourselves the question, are we there yet? And I've just been very, very aware that actually this has only kind of been a starting point to this real organisational process that's sitting around the recording system. And it's, the process of learning from this is very much ongoing. But I think one of its greatest achievements in many ways is that it's enabled us to kind of think about how can we respond to this learning, and creating a culture to think about how can we be and do better. We're very aware that there's a need for greater reciprocity and co-production, and the child in their own words, and very much kind of trying to work with social workers to ensure that it's not just their perspective that's given to the child, and a bit like what Linda was talking about at the start of the day. We need to have a much broader conceptualisation of the child's world, not just limited to individual feelings and internal states, but ideas that really kind of capture relationships and community, identity, race, religion and culture. And like we've been talking about this morning, a real need to improve digital platforms which are agile and inviting and mirror the child's world that integrate birth, foster families and professionals within the context of who is recording, and obviously the kind of the child being an integral part of that too. Yeah, that's it, Jane. Sorry.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. That's really interesting too. So much stuff coming out here that we can learn from. But we'll move on. Our final speaker this morning is Miriam Smith. Welcome, Miriam, from Aberdeen County Council, and she's going to talk about the child's voice and the importance of language in the co-production of records.
Hi, thank you. I'll just, if you give me a second, and I can share my screen with you. So just give me a minute. I just need to sort my thing out. Come on. There we go. Can you see that? Okay. Are you able to see that?
Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
Yeah, you can see. Yeah. That's great. So yeah, so I just wanted to, you know, take the time today to talk about the situation for us in Scotland. So I think most of the people who've spoken today are talking about your experience down in England, and so things are perhaps a little bit different perhaps for us in Scotland. I think there's been a lot said today about the importance of a child's voice, and it's something that is, you know, we all know is repeatedly highlighted, not just in terms of the importance of it in terms of identity and memory, in terms of rights for children and young people who we care for, but also in terms of safeguarding them. And the Scottish Child Abuse Inquiry and the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse that are currently ongoing at the moment, both repeatedly highlighting cultures that have failed to hear the voice of children. And, you know, those reports are highlighting the devastating impact that that has had. So voice and language have been a key element in Scotland as part of the independent review of care. And they concluded that the child's voice was overwhelmingly absent from the records, and that the language that was being used to write those records was contributing to the trauma and stigmatisation of children. So they have made a commitment to change the language of care, are committed to listen to what matters to children and to give this due weight and consideration as part of how we support them. But what they're not doing is saying specifically how we should go about doing that and how we should change the language of care. So in Aberdeen, we have a project called Write About Me. It's a multi-agency records project. So it's seeking to improve the way our current and our new workforces will write about those that we support, working with operational staff within children's social work, within the police, health, education, within our hearing system, and also working with the universities and colleges in our local area to look at the learning that new professionals would do when they come into post. So this project is integral to the way that we support our children. It's integral to our children's rights work, and in looking at how we can increase access and participation and voice, so that we can really ensure that we're listening to what matters to them, and that we reflect this in the writing that we do, making better use of our language so that we're demonstrating our understanding and the impact of trauma, the impact of poverty. And this work has been aligned to other strategic work within the city. We are working towards a Child Friendly City Award that's seeking to embed children's rights into all services within the city. It's part of our corporate parenting plan and part of our plan to keep the promise. So we are seeing the involvement of children in the writing of records as a really important aspect of the improvement work, particularly in relation to children's rights, their rights of access, their right to voice. And we seek through this work to ensure that co-production of records will be the default for the way that all records are written for them. So Aberdeen City Council are in quite a unique situation because we are having a new system built for us from scratch. And so the Write About Me project is influencing that bill to ensure that access, collaboration and voice are key factors in informing that development. So we're currently exploring with them how that new system and new technology will be able to support a greater variety of tools, some of which we've talked about today in terms of voice recording, video recording, transcription, photographs and so on, so that we can increase the opportunities for children to be more involved, both in real-time recording, but also in the drafting process of creating of their records. So we see this as an opportunity not only in terms of the accuracy of the information that we have when we're creating the narratives around children's lives and their family stories, but also in developing a more positive relationships with children and families, and to help to build the trust that we have with them, that we can sometimes undo with the way that we record the work that and support that we give to them. There has been pilot work done by an organisation called FutureGov that some of you may be aware about, who found that collaborative recording had a really positive impact on the language that was used. And we would see the co-produced records and that participatory way of working as absolutely crucial to improving the language of care. So we have identified that there are a number of factors. We're aware that there are many factors, and I think we've talked about some of them today, that can influence the agency that we give to the voice of children. And I suppose we are having a real focus on that as part of us looking at language. So looking at what does the child's voice actually look like in our writing? How does our own professional voice impact on that, and either give agency to it or take that away? And the impact of the circumstances and context in which a child's voice is given. So having a better understanding of some of the challenges that there might be for children in expressing their views. And looking at the conditions that we create to give agency to what children feel they need to say. So what is the voice of a child? So we have been looking very closely at examples of our writing from across the different agencies that are supporting our children. And I think it's fair to say that children's voice was hard to find, and it was not straightforward to define either. We knew when it wasn't there, we were really clear about it, but finding those really good positive alternatives was less easy for us to clarify. So, for example, being really clear about the accounts that children give of things that are happening, their perspective on things, and being really seeing how important it was to use their own words when we were doing that, rather than our interpretation of what we thought they were saying. Thinking about our professional voice and the importance of the account and description that we then gave perhaps to the way a child behaves or interacts or engages with particular processes. And so what we're beginning to see is that there are particular things that we will be able to use to identify some good tests of change that we will be testing out over the coming months. We can see that
2 minutes left, Miriam. Sorry.
Okay, that's good, thank you. We've identified a number of really key factors that influence the agency that we give to a child's voice. So context being one of them, so the inclusion and the context of what a child, in which a child's views are actually given. So that rich observation around the circumstances, including descriptions of their body language, are found to be really important in providing clarity about a child's voice. Although it seems ridiculous to say this, but the child's own words and what they're actually saying, or observation, where it is not necessarily just for children who are pre-verbal or non-verbal, but the importance of that sometimes just because it is difficult, things that children are trying to talk about, how free they are to give their views, who's there, other factors that might influence how freely they're able to give their views, perhaps historical experience of sharing their views in the past. The processes that give awareness to the balance of information and priorities that impact on our writing. And I think Rebecca touched on some of that in terms of how our processes can influence that and impact on the priorities that we give to our writing. The audience and the consideration on how we give audience to ensure that we're actually listening and giving equity to the voice of children in their records. What reasons do we accept for children's voices not being there? And then being really clear in our recording about how what children are telling us is influencing the decisions that are made, so that we ensure that we are feeding back to them about that. And we've really tried to look at voice initially, the voice of children separately, but I think what we could see is that this was as much about what the children themselves were communicating as it was about our own professional voices. We can see that the professional assessment voice is a really integral part to how a children's voice is or is not heard. We can see that a trauma-informed professional voice is really crucial if we're to hear what children are telling us. That professional curiosity and accuracy and validation of information, avoiding or clearly explaining our professional language and implementing children's rights are all really vital if we are really to be hearing what they're telling us and capturing that in our records. We need to have a good awareness about the barriers and the difficulties for children in expressing their views about the difficult and complex things that we're asking them to speak about, and the importance of building trusting relationships with them if they feel able to do that with us. So much of this has been reiterated. I kind of just want to finish with the views of one of our care experienced young people who very kindly said that we could use their feedback. So they were commenting about their experience of being in care and of being listened to. And they said, through my time in foster care, I felt I was very much listened to when verbally voicing my concerns. However, I never felt brave enough to voice what I truly felt. I think looking back, I gave a lot of non-verbal cues that I was struggling. For example, looking down when not speaking the truth of how I felt, shrugged shoulders, fiddling, quiet voice when speaking, looking around and looking at carers for approval of what I was saying, asking to see my social worker randomly without explaining to my carers due to fear of their reaction. I feel that sometimes these were missed.
Okay,
I want to...
Sorry, God, sorry, you have to finish.
Yeah, well, I was just to say that I wanted to finish with a question, which was to ask you that if you were to change one thing about the writing that you do for children that would have a positive impact on their voice, on their records and opportunities for them to participate, given that that you could do now, what would that be and what would you need to make that happen?
Thank you very much, Miriam. Thank you. Over to you, Elizabeth.
So that's absolutely brilliant. Thank you, Julia, for chairing that session, and thank you to our three speakers, Gavin, Miriam, Rebecca. It's brilliant to be able to share and hear about some of the fantastic work that's going on all around the country. And that's one of the points of this symposium, was to try to bring together people who are doing fantastic things and to provide a space where that could be shared with a wider audience. So thank you all for doing that so brilliantly in that session.